Hi, everybody. Thanks for coming. I'm Alder Marcia Rummel, the Alder for literally Union Corners, although it is at the intersection of three aldermanic districts, and the other alders have been invited, are actually in the building at another meeting, but Satya and Larry will both stop by. So we had this idea in the SASY Council, the Schenck-Atwood-Yahara Neighborhood Association, Starkweather Neighborhood Association, to figure out how can we take the opportunity with the city purchasing Union Corners through land banking funds to figure out how to revisit our vision of what was adopted and see if that's still operational. And also, we came up with this really good idea, not me, but one of the members of the council, to think about temporary and transitional uses. So eventually we want to see whatever we want to see, but how do we get there and how do we use the space until then? So that is the genesis for this meeting. Through the city, we got extra money to do sort of planning, so we've engaged Lou as his capacity as facilitator to take us through a process which you now have an agenda for. And then it turns out that this Congress for the New Urbanism is holding its annual conference here June 1st through the 4th. And they chose, independently of anything we did, Union Corners as a site for a design competition. So we didn't want it just to be an academic exercise of design professionals, although there will be some local ones, I understand, who will participate. But we wanted to kind of feed information in from our own history of the studio process and all the things that went into the adopted plan for McGrath, as well as ideas we have now. So they were very excited by this process. So we've now are going to feed this through City Channel into their information, as well as some of the work that the Friends of Union Corners have done through community benefits, and what comes out of here is sort of our recommendations. And so that's the main purpose of our meeting. And eventually we will come back, there'll be a design competition winner, and we can come and look at that and see what we think about it, and then continue our own process, which will inform the city and future developers of how we want to see this. And so with that, I welcome you all. And maybe the people who are on SASY Council could sort of raise your hand so people who know who you are and introduce yourselves. I'll just start over here.
My name is Mark McFadden.
Doug Johnson.
I'm Catherine.
John Steinitz.
So I want to thank them because they've been working with me in the city to bring this together. So we're kind of proud of our effort. And of course, Lou is a member too. But so thank you for coming, and let's talk soon.
Thanks, Marcia. These microphones, don't let them intimidate you. They're not going to make your voice any louder. This is not, I mean, if you're going to want to be heard in the room, you're going to have to talk up loud. These are just for the cameras, okay? So we have spaces up here, and I'd love for people who are not at a microphone, who are maybe intimidated by microphones, I know, Eric, you're not, to move up and cluster around the microphones. That way, at least your voice will get heard on the camera. It won't get heard unless you speak up in the room, because like I say, these are not involved in a PA system. So my name's Lou, and I have a whole program for us today, which I'm hoping will be fun and straightforward, and I promise to get you out by 1 o'clock. What you're seeing in the background is shots of things I'm sure you are quite familiar with, but not all. This is Union Corners, shot from many different angles, inside and outside, and I did this because I realized that not everybody necessarily will have motivated themselves to walk around on the soggy ground and check everything out in detail. One of the first things I want to ask, we're having a little bit of a conflict with the camera, lights, and this. Is this bright enough to see? This is as bright as we can get it. If you can't see it, again, I'd urge you to move up, get chairs. You can even be in here as far as that goes, I suppose, although I'm sure the camera people would freak if you, disturb their cables too much. So can you see? Can I see a show of hands? Because what we're going to be doing here, Joe, you can see, you're the farthest away. Okay, good. What we're going to be doing today is a couple of things. I want to get started with what Marcia ended with, this notion of the Congress of New Urbanism having a conference in June. We're going to talk more about that later. But long story short is we have an opportunity here, and the opportunity is to give guidance to this group of professional designers. We don't know who they are, we don't know who will enter their competition or how many and so on, what quality work they'll do. But we have an opportunity up until the 15th to sort of inform their guidelines, the goals that they're going to tell these competitors. and that's why we're gathered here today. So the first thing I'm going to do is kind of do a little PowerPoint to help you sort of get in the headspace of how an urban designer thinks. It'll take them, I keep talking into this mic like it means anything. I'm going to change the PowerPoint here, so give me a moment. Okay, so here we are, talking about Union Corners. Here's a bird's eye view. Can you see that? This is a bird's eye view of the site. Looking easterly, you see, obviously, Union Corners. You see Lake Monona in the distance. You're sort of looking down a little bit down Milwaukee Street. Milwaukee is north, due east and west. All right. Here's looking a little bit more southerly. You can see just in the right there. That's the Barrymore Theater, and you're sort of above East Washington in this balloon or wherever they're taking the picture, so that you get the sense there's the new roundabout. This is actually fairly current pictures, right? I mean, not obviously from this year. Here's what the site looks like from the inside. This is the temporary brick storage, and with the billboard in the background. Another temporary use right now, and I'm going to distinguish between temporary and transitional uses. We're going to talk about this in a little bit. So I'm showing you some temporary uses that the site is currently being used for. When the Williamson Street reconstruction decided to go ahead, one of the things that they do that we do now in the construction world that we didn't used to do is we do lots of recycling. They're going to take up the pavement, the gravel underneath the pavement. They're going to grind everything up and use it back for fill. So they need like a rock crushing operation. Terrible thing in the neighborhood. You wouldn't want this to be happening next to houses. So Union Corners presents itself as a place which, kind of far away, this is, you can see, it's close to East Washington as they could get, where they're going to have the rock crushing operation. They'll truck stuff from Williamson Street, crush it there, take it back to Willie, and use it for road bed. So temporary use. Okay, some of you who were involved, this is, I think, back to 2003, something like that, 2004, will recognize this map, and there's actually a set of these maps. Joe, were you able to bring, you didn't bring, if you want to look at the whole set of them later, I've got a copy here. They're on the web. I mean, they're very available. What this is this is the sort of the cover sheet called Concept Site Plan for a set of PDFs, set of documents that came out of a public input process in 2004, 2003. Can I have a show of hands of anybody who was either in the process or aware that was happening? So a lot of people, half the room. Okay, you know what I'm talking about. This was actually pretty historic and pretty groundbreaking. The fact that a developer would sit down with a neighbor, not just like, drag kicking and screaming, but wanting the neighborhood input to have a studio process that lasted, I think, like 6 months. High quality maps, high quality discussion, consultants that could take what people were saying and draw that. Not always, free of contention, but out of that process came actually a pretty amazing thing in that you had a group of people committed lots of time over that period with the professional help to come out with some excellent stuff that really sort of encodes what people were after on that site. Like I say, not everybody got everything they wanted, but there's an amazing amount of good stuff in here. Okay, out of that, fast forward now a year and a half, if you recall, there was a big process where they selected developers. Todd McGrath, who was actually, I'm messing up the chronology a little bit. They were actually very involved with that studio process. They had gotten the nod. Meantime, they were like cleaning up the site. There was millions of dollars and 63 tons worth of toxins came out of the soil, remediating the soil from the battery waste from the French battery company, Rayovac. Fast forwarding there, they came up with this plan. Now this plan is somewhat different than the other plan, but based on it. And it was close enough that, although there was a lot of angst at the time, and justifiably, I think in some cases, most people were more or less pleased with what came out of it and with the phasing of it, the fact that the French battery building was going to be restored or replaced, that there was lots of housing, there's lots of mixed uses, there was green and open space. There's a lot of the principles that the neighborhood was after encoded in this thing. Okay, I'll talk more about that at the end because this is something that's going to be important with this CNU conference, and obviously it's going to be important to us always going forward. So here's what it looks like today, though. None of that got built, right, except for the roundabout the road through. Some underground utilities are in there. I noticed the other day there's some manhole covers in the grass, which I didn't realize had gotten in, some curb cuts and so on. But basically, you've got a bare grassy site like you saw. So my job, I feel like today, to sort of get us all on the same page before we delve into the work that we're going to be doing this noon, is to give you a sense of how these urban designers from the Congress of New Urbanism are going to think. And if you're wondering why we even care, I'll get to that. I want to sort of tantalize you and give you a sense of how they think, and then explain to you why it's important that we know how they think.
Can you just briefly explain why those proposals didn't work?
Did everybody hear the question? Why didn't those proposals work? Basically, the economy tanked. The McGraths had to sell back the land. I don't think they actually went into bankruptcy, but that particular project tanked, and none of their hundreds of units of housing, the grocery store, the office, none of that happened because they pulled out. They financially couldn't do it. The market just dropped. The market for everything just, that's the basic reason. So, good bit of history. What happened just fairly recently to the, from the work of Joe and many other people, the city passed a land banking ordinance, and actually Marcia could talk much better about this than I could, and bought the land. This is fairly recent. This was
Last year.
Was it last year? I thought it was January. Now the city owns it. Okay, the city, in other words, it went back to the bank. The bank was, eager to unload it. It was like on their bad debt list, and they were having trouble with their regulators. Eager to unload it. City bought it. Now we're talking about a city-owned parcel of 11 acres that's sitting there with grass on it. And it's like, okay, now what do we do with it? So this little bit here, this little PowerPoint that I'm going to run through and try to get done by about 1:30, is talking about basically what a designer will think of as sort of the obvious things about this site. Now, realize these guys are coming in, guys and gals are coming in from all over the country, don't know this site, don't know the neighborhood, don't know what we've been doing, don't know, certainly you weren't involved in 2003 talking about this stuff. They see the physical, right? This is the first thing to remember. They see the physical, they're going to see pictures. It would be unusual if they actually traveled here to look. Mostly they're getting this stuff off the website, or they're making phone calls to the people who are running the competitions, asking about things. What they can intuit from storefronts or from the visuals, that's kind of mostly what they're going to get. But here's what's really on the site. First thing is this bike path, right? There is a very nice bike path, possible. Right now, it's basically gravel in the grass. It's paved, but it's sort of sitting there on the grass. But my feeling is, and I would say this as an urban designer, it's like that's not going away. It's not, it's not suddenly somebody's going to have a brilliant idea and people are going to decide, oh, well, you don't need a bike path. It's like that's probably not going to happen. So it's a feature of the site. The other thing that's a feature of the site that was, those of you who were involved, it's that grove of trees. If you remember, some of those of us have been around the neighborhood long enough, remember the French Battery building, the Rayovac building we called it, and it had a grove of oak trees, or maple trees I guess it was, out in front of it. Well, there was lots of angst about tearing down even one of those trees, and where was the road going to go, and remember the whole conflict about how Winnebago ends into East Washington and what that does for all the traffic upstream, not to just the SASY neighborhood, but to the Marquette neighborhood. How does that whole corridor work? That historically, that was the streetcar line. That's why Winnebago is so wide and so attractive to cars going fast, because it had a streetcar down the middle. And how is that going to meet East Washington? Well, this is eventually the resolution, this roundabout that if you've driven through there, you're aware of how that got resolved. Okay, but that grove of trees remains, or part of that grove of tree remains, and it was something the neighborhood really wanted. And it's by the bike path too. Actually, the bike path is inboard of it, so it seems to me very unlikely that grove of trees is going to go anywhere. People will not let it happen. So it becomes a fixture of the site that an urban designer deals with. Some other obvious things to everybody. This is I'm not inventing this stuff. This blue area. This is the residential. All this is single-family residential. Whereas if there's going to be residential on the site, and everybody said over and over again there needs to be, where is it going to go? Well, it's probably going to go near the residential. I'm saying obvious stuff here because this is kind of how if you want to say, like a graphical representation of the sort of obvious conclusions of principles that people come to when they look at this site. Okay, there's the residential on the other side. The railroad corridor, huge feature. Maybe it's light rail, maybe it's heavy rail. It's certainly active rail now, and the residential being next to it gives you challenges and opportunities, but it's there, okay? Can't ignore that. There's the rail corridor. See the Sons of Norway there in the background. Every one of these plans, these processes, have always talked about the railway and how you connect this neighborhood. If you look at a larger map of this part of the city, and it's one of the things that really got people in the neighborhood out in force to talk about high-speed rail, because this is the neighborhood that is the most impacted by high-speed rail, by any rail of any in the city. In other words, when it comes in, it's coming through this neighborhood. It's potentially dividing this neighborhood. So how do you keep that from happening? How do you have kids who are living here being able to get to the Goodman Community Center, or get to walk to school? How do you, if you're here and there's shops here, how do you get there? You really can't get there from here. What's the cliche? Now, unless you supposedly illegally cross the railroad, that's only going to get more dangerous or more of an issue if there's much more traffic. So there's always been the conversation, we got to formalize something. All these street ends, which dead end along, that they keep going, dead end into the rail corridor, we got to have something across there. So some sort of ped bike kind of connection. It doesn't have to be vehicular. Right, so moving to the other side of the site, again, obvious stuff. 54,000 cars a day on East Washington Avenue. Very different character here than here. Urban designer looks like that and goes, okay, what's going there? What's likely to happen there? This is what it looks like. You see East High in the background, a block from the site. What's going to happen from an urban designer's perspective is you're not putting the housing here. There's no single-family housing on East Washington. This is going to be a mix of uses. This is going to be things like, you name it. We have all named it. Commercial, offices, retail, maybe apartments above, but certainly commercial kind of stuff down below. You've got a mix of uses across the street and up and down the block. You can see the muffler shop, the church, the adult bookstore, the vacant now store, used to be a restaurant, a lot of mix of uses. So this is going to, of those mix of uses, which sort of are in this part here, not over here, you wouldn't put, the muffler shop's not going next to the house. Just really not likely, right? The single family home, the big mansion or the three of them, they're not going on that corner. That's not happening. These are sort of obvious things that an urban designer is going to look at and go, okay, so here's going to be a zone of retail-ish. We're not sure. Realize I'm doing this real broad brush. I'm not saying, well, we should talk about whether there's a hardware store here, or is it really appropriate to have a dry cleaner there, and horrors, it's like, we're not talking about that. That's not this level of discussion. Today we're not here for designing. We're here for giving guidance to designers, which is a different thing. And so I'm just trying to get us all on the same page, kind of broad brush. The other thing, the final thing that they will see when they look at this site, especially if they look at the shots on the website that the city's that the CNU's got, is what they'll call gateways. If you are driving down here, I'll go to that shot. Here you're driving down East Washington. There's actually a bend in the road. East Washington, we think of it as straight. It's not straight. It bends all over the place. Here there's a major bend in an intersection where North and Milwaukee meet it. And what actually happens is if you're coming, say, from the airport, you're arriving in town, or you're coming off, you just came off of 30, you go into this newly designed overpass, a beautiful bridge, by the creek. You come to this intersection, and then there's a bend, and what happens is sort of a reveal, all right? As you turn slightly left, you're now lined up with the Capitol, and you've been coming into the town, you're coming into Madison, it's the capital city, the Capitol's there. You get this reveal, almost, theatrical, and down the road, way in the distance is the Capitol. It happens here, all right? So this is truly a gateway sort of to the rest of downtown. You're going past, from the airport and so on, you're going past strip malls, you're going past Papa John's and Madison East Shopping Center, low rise, kind of everywhere USA, I'm sorry, but it kind of is. You get to this corner and you get this reveal, you've got houses and trees lining, and you got the Capitol at the end. Here's Union Corners. That point, that's what an urban designer would call a gateway. That's that point there. And that deserves something. That deserves something big, something obvious. A tower, an artwork, a building that's got special architectural character, the way it turns the corner, the way it meets the sky, all are going to be important. So they'll think of that as a gateway feature. There's also similar, smaller scale, both physically smaller scale and also sort of more intimate neighborhood gateway kind of in this area. As you're coming from the rest of the neighborhood into an area which will be, despite our best efforts, a little bit isolated, or a little bit, not isolated isn't a good word, a little bit unto itself, right? This is going to still kind of be an area because you kind of can't get there except by sort of special dispensation, right? So there's a bit of a feeling of entry into that area that's not big and open and grand and like big sky here. It's a little more intimate, right? Curving road, the grove of trees. Maybe the grove of trees becomes part of that gateway. Maybe there's a piece of artwork. Maybe the landscaping around both sides. Maybe we do more trees over here to match that, and there's an archway. A lot of options. Again, we're doing broad brush. We're not putting a fine point on it. We're just saying that's an opportunity, and that's something an urban designer is going to look at. So here's sort of the summary of those, call it those forces. The zones we talked about, the nodes, the corridors through. These are the kinds of words that urban designers will use as they think about this as a physical site. Is that making sense? So we've got sort of encoded in that, but not necessarily obvious in the physical, we've got a whole set of what I'm calling consensus principles that have emerged out of these processes. From that public input process in 2003, you can go on the website and you can just sort of read them. They're nicely presented. They're not only presented in text, but there's some illustration related to the map. They're also, to a large extent, really encoded in the McGrath PUD package that went in subsequently. How they were expressed, how tall this building was versus that building, or where it was orange. Those things might be different from the public input process, but the principles were really quite similar. Similarly, there was a set of goals, expectations, hopes embedded in the city's land banking criteria that happened last year. So, between Marcia and I, we tried to comb through there and find the commonalities. And here's pretty much a list that we came up with. All of those lists emphasize sustainability, and sustainability in all its forms, not just green buildings, but site work, and not just energy, but all the issues around sustainability, long life, durability, economic viability is actually an important part of sustainability. The principle that it be walkable and bikeable and pedestrian friendly, child friendly, safe, kept coming through. Really an obvious and consensus held value, a principle. This is this kind of list that you see, and I'm going to talk about each one of them, but this is the kind of list that the Congress for New Urbanism design competitors are getting. This is one of the reasons that they're attracted to the site in the first place. This is why CNU picked one of the reasons that the Congress even chose this site, to have a competition at all. The fact that it has a mix of uses has been a commonly held value. Something on the tax rolls. In other words, the land just doesn't become a park. It doesn't become, a quarry. It's something that produces some tax revenue for the city, is obviously important to the city, and is actually embedded in the land banking ordinance. A mix of housing types, we talked about that. Some green space and a gathering space has always been in all of those proposals. They've always been expressed in different ways, and there's different characters of that. And I'm going to harp on this a little bit because I want us to think about this when we get to the next exercise. There's different kinds of open space. There's different kinds of community space. If I've got an apartment building, I've got my apartment, right, and I've got a door to the outside, and I'm going to go out there and grill, or I'm going to sit with my dog, or I'm going to read a book, or I'm going to play Frisbee with my kids. That is open space that could be shared, say if I'm in an apartment or condominium situation, but it's not like a public space, right? It would be called semi-public or semi-private, somewhere in there. Then there's other kinds of spaces like the Capitol, which is everybody's space, right? And there's farmers market, there's art fairs, there's political rallies, there's everything that happens that's an intensely public space, no private space there at all. and there's spaces in between. Public parks, small pocket parks in neighborhoods are certainly public, but they tend to be more intimate. So what I'm saying is there's gradations of space. This is how urban designers think. So a really big space that's really open, that's got axial views and allays of trees and stuff and these are fancy fountains or whatever. Those are going to be a public space of a different kind, an important kind, but different than, say, a smaller intimate, that grove of trees, which is quiet, smaller. You're not having football games there. You're sitting and reading, or you're waving to the bike riders going by. Maybe you're walking your dog through that. So different kinds of public space. Good fit with adjacent, obviously. Very important. What goes where? Residential here, retail here, just good fit with what's around it. More than one story, an important criteria. A lot of America, especially built since the World War II, is one story, right? We call them strip malls. We call them highway commercial. A lot of East Washington is like that, and there was, many of you were involved in the East Wash rail corridor rethinking process, and we're talking anywhere from minimum of 2 stories up to 8 and 15 stories in some cases. That has to do with density. It has to do with a quality of an urban environment that you just don't get from one story. So at least more than one story. I would say 2 minimum, but that's just me. No parking in front of the buildings. Not like say a big drugstore coming in would want a big parking lot in the front because that shows that it's car friendly. We're talking walkable and bikeable. Put the parking on the side, put it in the back, put it underground. This is not a suburban situation. Transit-oriented development, that's an obvious one. You got a rail corridor right near there. Whether that's high-speed rail stop, maybe not likely, but certainly a light rail or a commuter rail kind of stop, that's a natural. Rebuilding the French Battery building kept coming up. That's why that pile of bricks sits there. People don't want to lose that idea. People also do not want to break up the site. They do not want to see piecemeal development. I'm convinced, will lay down in front of bulldozers if that site gets somehow broken up and parceled off and developed piecemeal, and these principles don't get expressed ultimately in a whole vision. That's not to say that individual developers at some point might not get the nod to develop a particular parcel, but it's always in the context of that larger vision. And I think people have to both separate that and connect that so that stays whole. That gateway corner to Milwaukee, at that corner I was talking about, an obvious one, and then the roundabout is, as an existing thing, as sort of a form giver, that's there as well. So I said I would talk about the Congress of New Urbanism and why we care and why we're doing this, why we're here today. The notion is that in June, there's this conference. They've picked Madison. They're all excited to come to Madison. I'm sure they're more excited, in the last month and a half to what's happening in the city. This is like the happening place. They're coming. They're being in the Monona Terrace from June 1st to June 4th. But before that happens, starting at the end of this month, on this coming Tuesday is the last day. We have a chance to put in our input into the competition guidelines, right? Before June 1st, they're having a design competition that people are going to, teams, they hope, people are signing up now to design this site as a design exercise. They're going to work for months, and then they're going to come on June 1st to the 4th and present these things, right? And we've got the opportunity not only to write the guidelines, but we've got somebody on the jury. Doug Johnson from SASY is going to be on the jury, as well as those other jurors, to judge these things. We don't know if we're going to get two entries or 80, but what we do know is that we want to inform that process that they're going to go through. If I got another slide here, because they don't know the site like we know the site. They haven't studied it since 2003. They haven't been at meetings like that. They're going to kind of dare I say, they're going to sort of helicopter in and going to go, well, this looks like, this view down here, and the street lines up this way, and we could do this, and I'm being a little glib. There's going to be some excellent proposals, I hope, but they're not going to know the site the way we are, and they're not going to know something that has come up recently, the brilliant idea of Mark McFadden. I would give credit for starting it from SASY, the notion of transitional uses. I think we're going to take a break here, but I'm going to talk a little bit about about this if people are comfortable and settled and don't have to go to the bathroom yet. This notion of transitional uses. Well, I should stop here. Any questions so far? Any clarifications? Have I left anything out? Let me launch into it. The notion of transitional uses. I mean, Mark had this really, I think, basic, brilliant observation, which is, hey, nothing's happening here. This is just grass. There's the occasional dog walker, there's an occasional bike rider. Now the city is crushing gravel, but it's like nothing's really happening here. This is not an asset to our neighborhood, and it doesn't look like with the economy the way it is that anything's going to happen very soon. And if something happened even soon, which is extremely unlikely, it's likely to be kind of what it was, right? I mean, we're going to kind of, you know, we've even though the PUD, the zoning, the McGrath proposal, that's dead, and the zoning is no longer there. They're no longer required to do that. You know, what are we really going to get? What is there not, in fact, a way to think about using that site in a transitional way that A, doesn't get in the way of some cool thing coming down the road, some cool development, B, actually can support that, actually can make it more likely to happen, and C, in the meantime, enliven that, and make it more than just grass, you know, soggy grass with some bricks on it. So this notion of transitional uses for the site in the meantime, for those three pretty challenging goals, actually turns out to be not just innovative, but it's like nobody's done it before, you know, at least in this kind of version. It turns out, you know, part B of Mark's brilliant vision was this is actually an opportunity for the city to look at this kind of activity, transitional uses, in relation to the land banking ordinance. If the city, and many of us think that the land banking ordinance is a great idea, it gives the city lots of options and lots of flexibility, but that really hasn't been done much in the city before as well. So you've got places like Royster Clark, you've got the Don Miller site, you've got the Union Corners, all very different, all have very different forces on them, very different, you know, paths forward and so on. We're sort of inventing, as a city, we're inventing how you use the land banking ordinance. Well, wouldn't it be very interesting and very helpful and ultimately a really positive thing if we could look at all the energy around Union Corners as a way to inform how the city uses land banking. And if you think of it in terms of the transitional uses, is there a way to deal with things like safety and liability and who insures it and how do you contract and how do you manage transitional uses? Is there a way to cook up a format, use this as a test case, and do those three goals, you know, that I was talking about earlier in the context of the land banking ordinance. So, transitional uses. We're going to be getting into, in a little bit after the break, a brainstorming session about transitional uses and what that means. But I want to talk a little bit about the difference between temporary and transitional. And it was no accident that I showed the bricks and the gravel crushing slides before. Those are temporary uses. And so I want to distinguish between transition and temporary. Nobody thinks that that's going to be a rock crushing operation, you know, for the next 10 years or 20 years. It's like that's not happening at that site. That's not going to be brick storage area, you know, for very much longer. Those are not transitioning into anything. They're just temporary uses for the land because it's there, and those things are, you know, important to do, and we got a place to do them. Transitional, we're talking about as uses that go someplace, right? They transition to something. In the meantime, we're doing it like this, but eventually we hope for this. How does the thing that we're doing today help that? How does having Greek Fest in the grass lead to something? You know, how does having temporary art installations or dog parks or playgrounds or whatever lead to something else? How does it potentially impede that something else? And how does it support that something else, or does it have, you know, a neutral impact? So time frame is very important. For example, a transitional use like, say, Greek Fest is going to be a day or two, right? Set up, take down the event, maybe 2-3 days. Something like, Union Corners is a staging ground for Ironman competitions with lots of bikes and competitors. Maybe it's a week with the setup and all that kind of stuff. Then there's other kinds of uses. Say the Ironman competition with all the bikes this is like, like literally on the moment. It gets to be a cool thing, and then there turns out to be 2 other events that year, bike-related. Now, some bike entrepreneur says, wouldn't it be great to have, with all this activity, we could have a tent here. We could have we'll have repair workshops. Every time there's a farmer's market, we're going to have repair workshops. And now there's this sort of a whole summer of bike-related kinds of things happening. Okay, that's no longer a day or 2 event. Now that's maybe several months. Maybe it's a season. So that we have a sort of a medium time frame, right? Now think of a longer time frame kind of thing. Say, out of the top of my head, urban agriculture. We hire somebody, a gardener, like this is, the precedent in the city here is Troy Gardens. There's an urban gardener. They hired a gardener. There's some land. That person is hired to produce food, run a CSA, do educational programs, and so on and so on. What about somebody like that at Union Corners? Well, that's not going to be a month or 2 months or a season. That's probably going to be a contract for at least a year, might be for 2 or 3 years. So I'm trying to say there's different time frames for transitional uses that have different effects. This stuff quickly gets to be brain numbing, and it's one of the reasons why we've gathered here today, because I want us, after we're done with all the talking, I want us to sit and brainstorm and think through some of the implications of these, because they are many. The management ongoing is, we realized this early on when we were talking about transitional uses. How do you actually manage something like that? You got this piece of ground. It's like it's not the Overture Center. There's not a building on it, but there's all, if we're saying there's transitional uses, there's all this stuff going to happen. You need somebody to schedule Greek Fest so that it doesn't, conflict with the bikers convention that's happening there, the week after, and to get their insurance certificates and to take the phone calls about what's possible for next year and all. There has to be some sort of level of management. Is that a minor, blip on the table of a city staffer who's bugged by it, or is that a quarter-time position? Is that what kinds of things will evolve here, and what are the management strategies that are needed to help that evolve? Finally, before we take a break here, I wanted to talk a minute about this notion of city making versus development. And this is something that I know it caught the attention of the mayor, and it helped people think about sort of how about this site. This hasn't been done before. If you look on the web, there's a few places in the country where they're using bits of land like this in cities with, I'm thinking of, it's not Yorba Linda, what's the town in California we looked up? I'm blanking on the name. They had a piece of land. Eventually it's going to be their city center. That's going to, town hall, probably a parking lot, public meeting space and so on. But they don't have the funding for it right now. So they got this piece of land in an important, nice part of town. So temporarily they're doing things like a shuffleboard, and I think they have a one time a week farmer's market. There's a little outdoor cafe kind of set up in a tent thing with a temporary kitchen. There's some nice landscaping that will eventually be torn out, and some paving and so on. Transitional in the sense that I suppose that it's kind of a civic space, but really a temporary use. They know what they're going to put there. There's even plans for that, and this is sort of the temporary use of that land. So what we're doing here is really history making. This is really different to say, and it's actually, I would argue, in some ways goes back to a very, very early form of city making that our ancestors 2,000 years ago understood. There's a patch of land. There's a road near it. Oh, I'll put a kiosk there and I'll sell pomegranate juice because the people using the road will buy my pomegranate juice. Okay, now I got a kiosk. Well, eventually, years go by, and that's now a little bit more of a permanent building. Somebody else goes, hey, all the people are stopping there, with their horses. I'll put a blacksmith shop there, and I'll, have business because I'll be able to, shoe their horses or whatever, that kind of thing. And in other words, cities tend to grow incrementally as things sort of stick, and people realize that's a good place, that's some place, that is a place, we can do something here. Versus, now think of that model. I mean, historically, you can think of those kinds of models. Think of how we do it now, though, in the 21st century. We do development, we have a very organized process. We have zoning rules that allow a developer or somebody with an idea with backers, investors to come in and say, I want to do so many units of housing. I want to do retail underneath it. Here's what my parking looks like. Here's what my my rent structure. And we have TIF, and we have a lot of mechanisms to do development. Now, we still do city making, but it isn't the same sort of incremental slow. We sort of compress it all into this time frame, and this is what we didn't get, you know, from the McGrath process. We didn't get, like you were saying earlier, that didn't happen in that way. So now we have the opportunity at least to look at this other model, to look at these transitional uses in the way they could help grow this site into a piece of the city. We all agree pretty much that it probably shouldn't just stay a big soggy patch of grass, you know? We can do better than that. What is that better? What will that transition into? So it's a way to think about, it's not to get, well, I guess part of what I'm saying is, like, don't get depressed that we don't have 300 units of housing there last year, you know? Here's an opportunity to rethink the site, but to do it in a different way. It's the same kind of community input process, but different. Is that making sense? I'm hoping that will emerge as we get into the details of the brainstorming, and I think we should go into that now. We should take a break, Catherine? Yeah.
Do we know the time frame for the gravel crushing operation that I'm just learning about today, which is actually what is going on there presently?
Did everybody hear that question? Because again, these microphones don't amplify your voice to the crowd.
I mean, I'm assuming
The
that's
question is-
go ahead.
History of the gravel crushing operation?
So
Speak, Marcia, talk really loud.
the city is now required to do this recycling, and so the first question was posed to me, can we do it in Central Park? And I kind of thought, I don't really think Central Park's the best spot, and I thought of different spots, and eventually we settled on this spot. So it's not an ideal use, obviously, to have, but it does fit with a potential future use, which you'll hear about later from somebody in the audience, because it sort of makes it more of a wasteland. But the idea is that twice during the whole construction, they will bring the asphalt that they've upended in this materials and crush it and reuse it. So there'll be 2 intense periods where they will be crushing, but basically it'll be a storage thing from the beginning of the project till they reuse the materials. So just through late summer, I would assume. But it won't be like an every day you're gonna hear loud rock crushing. It'll just be 2 intense periods where they're
So
gonna.
Marcia, this will help inform my brainstorming about transitional or temporary uses. Do we know that that's a temporary use of the site? I mean, once this is all done, they're
It is
leaving the
100%
site? I mean-
temporary. It was one of those things, because now we have rules where we want to recycle, but now you have to find a place to do that work. So it's going to be a problem in the future as we do big roads. Where are we going to do recycling? But so here was an opportunity, and it's truly temporary.
You don't get a sense from the slides, but if all of you who were around last year, the last few years, remembering the reconstruction of East Wash, those big mountains of gravel down the median, that's what we're talking about. You know, lots of big piles that get built up, stay there for some weeks or months, and then go away.
And immediate neighbors will be getting a letter very shortly from the city explaining the process in detail. So pretty much all around the neighborhood, if you live nearby, you'll get a letter explaining in detail who to contact if you have questions. So that should be made clear to everybody.
Steve?
I'm unclear about the connection between brainstorming about transitional uses and the CNU competition, which presumably is proposing permanent or more long-term uses. And how will ideas about transitional uses be useful or inform the CNU?
That's an excellent, did everybody hear that question?
Can I answer the question first before you go on to the new subject? Sure. Has the city been paid to use that site for crushing, or you cut in the job bid because we're crushing on Moody Corners?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the.
Are we making any money off that job crushing? Is the city getting paid to have that space used? As long as it says you're up there, you're supposed to be making money off the land use?
I don't know the answer
Or
to
does the
that.
bid come down cheaper because we're using that space?
I mean, we required the winning bidder to do crushing, so I don't believe that they are paying us, but I don't really know the answer
Because
for
one of the
sure.
criteria up there was to make money off your public land.
Right.
That's why you bought the land, to make money.
So back to Steve's question, if you all heard it, was really what's the connection between the transitional uses and CNU's design competition? And there's 2 parts to the answer of that question. One is we're making that happen. They haven't heard about transitional uses yet. They don't, that's not in their program. They don't know what that is.
So we're asking them to consider transitional uses?
We're asking them to consider transitional uses. we're basing that request, well, on the fact that some neighbors think this is a great idea, and we're here to see if it is a good idea. But we're also, there's something in their guidelines which is quite clear and repeated several times, unlike some of the other things, is that they're requiring, or they're strongly encouraging their design competition people to consider phased uses. That's how they express it. In other words, they're very much aware, especially in this economy, that the full done thing, 2 years, from planning to getting built, and it's all filled up and it's all rented up and it's all going, that's not going to happen likely in this. I mean, it's not happening in very many markets. And so they're encouraging their competitors to present plans that show incremental phasing of the site as it builds up in a little bit more of an organic way. What we're hoping to do is to take that to this level, to say, we're not interested, we are interested in what happens in 5 years, but we would like something to happen now. Is there something that we can do? Is there many things that we can do with this site that will eventually lead to this being even more likely to be developed in a beautiful way that we all envision with all these principles now? Is there things we can do now? And can you, in fact, not actually have a thought for that when you design your plan? Again, we're not doing design here, but just to give you a visual to get across what I'm saying. Say you had, go back to Greek Fest, because actually this is an idea that comes up over and over again, including from the Greek Orthodox Church. They would need a patch of land to do that. Okay, where that patch of land is and what happens around there could actually support outdoor cafes or a playground, or maybe a small parking area in the back. Or it could conflict. If nobody thinks about it, it's going to conflict. But if somebody thinks about it, gives a little thought to the kinds of uses that we're going to come up with, those things can both be supported transitionally and function to support eventual development. This is if we do our job right. Now, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to work perfectly. We're inventing this. We're making this up. Madison is on the cutting edge. We're trying to figure out how to do this. But I think there is a way to come up with a list of sort of cogent, workable transitional uses. I could be wrong, but that's why we're here today, and that's what I'm hoping we can do.
So in a sense, we're asking the competitors to add another dimension to their concept of phasing, where
yes,
a designer might think of phasing. Okay, phase 1 is the housing over here. Phase 2 is the commercial over here. We're asking to even step back from there and say some even earlier phases of possible community uses. Okay.
Did everybody hear that? I think that they will not only, I think some of them won't get it. I think some of them will love the idea. And here's the opportunity. This competition, if these entries are good, and I have no reason to believe that we're not going to have some excellent ones, the city is going to look hard at that. We're going to be excited. We're going to try to, Marcia's already been working on getting the building that the McGrath's built and never finished, getting a certificate of occupancy, allowing us to get in there, certainly by June, hopefully earlier. This hopefully will not be the last of these kinds of meetings. We're hoping to have sort of a grand display of the entries. There's already like these cool furnishings in there with kind of easel sort of things. We're hoping to have those Congress of New Urbanism competition boards in the space for us all to look at and to hopefully get excited by. There's going to be a lot of ideas. Some of those ideas will stick. The planning department, the mayor, the citizens will look at certain things and go, "We got to have that," or like, "No way." It'll be a real clarifying, potentially real clarifying and wonderful moment where we get lots of feedback, design feedback from outsiders. Our job, I think, is to help inform and guide that so that it truly is responsive and it's not just blue sky stuff that's never going to happen and we all forget about it. Is that, and I think the transitional uses, the notion of transitional uses, like I say, I think we'll get some designers really charged up and it will really ground those proposals. If we can come up with good list of stuff and good rationale of why those things make sense, and the stuff that doesn't make sense isn't even on the list, it will ground their proposals in a way that I think that will be far more energizing and ultimately far more helpful than if they were just, if they're just academic exercises. If we Well, let's have another question, and then we're a little bit late for the break. I want to give people a chance to have a break, and we're going to come back and do the brainstorming. Larry?
Yeah, I just want to comment that, you know, I think as you're explaining the conceptual framework here, the idea of a transitional component, it really is dependent upon deep place understanding. You know, and that only comes from the community members. So, I mean, it's one thing for a design team to come in and look at a place, you know, in half an hour and come up with a great, you know, a great concept. But, you know, for that transitional component to really become a vibrant part of the larger picture, it really does have to come from that deep place understanding and the idiosyncrasies of the place. And so, you know, certainly these kinds of opportunities to share and brainstorm those ideas, I think that's really the place where that seed takes you know, it gets planted and takes root, and if what we do here can, you know, help inform what the seed, you know, this design competition is about, I think that's a good compliment.
Yeah, I do too. If you're willing, we can take a break. 10 minutes. I'll start yelling and calling you all back.
And there's bathrooms